Hey everyone, this is Justin Madison. Today we're going to be putting in some baseboard in a house that we're doing a remodel in. So we're going to go all over a bunch of basics and the steps that we use to put in trims or whatever for a house. So the very first thing we need to talk about is pretty common is safety. So if we're going to be installing trim, we're going to have to use tools like a miter saw, nail guns, etc. So maybe you already know this stuff, but just to keep it very beginner level, chop saws, very dangerous. You do not want to have your hand anywhere near these blades when you're operating them. And you want to keep these guards on. These guards are legally required. Now, when you're managing whatever you're cutting, a good rule of thumb, on your miter saw, there's generally this plastic or metal piece down at the bottom. It's a different color. Keep your hands away from this space at all times. Do not, when you're cutting wood, if your hand is past it, that's no good. You zoom in a bit. So if I'm holding my piece of lumber or my piece of wood here, I don't ever want my hand, can you see this, Jeremy? To go inside the yellow zone, right? Or whatever color yours is. Keep it away. Also, let's say when you're cutting a piece of wood, when you go to plunge your saw, what is this thing? The new saw. It's nice having a new saw, but you gotta learn how to use it. Okay. Never, ever, ever start your saw touching your lumber. If you do this, it's going to cause kickback and your blade is going to pretty much shatter your piece of wood. So if you're going to do a cut, start at the top, engage your switch, plunge all the way through. Do not cut and stop halfway and come back up, or go just halfway and then stop. You need to make sure you're all the way through. Otherwise, these little teeth, if you take a look, when they slide back, they'll catch as they stop and cause splintering. That is not what we want. So next thing, when you're dealing with longer pieces, if you take a look over here right now, I have kind of a rigged up third leg or whatever saw stand. You need to make sure that the piece of wood you're cutting is completely flush. If I didn't have that over there, this piece would want to start tipping up from the weight over on the end. Over here on the other end, we have a roller leg. You need to use these. We have them. This one isn't set yet. We just set up the saw. So I'm going to unscrew my stop, and I'm going to roll this up until I touch the bottom, and I look down my piece of wood over at my wood on the saw to make sure it's completely flush. I'm going to hold it very still, lock in my leg, and kind of do like a rock test. Yeah, this is nice and smooth, nice and flat. If you don't do this and you leave it so that it's loose or it's not completely flat, when you go to your cuts, you're not going to end up with those perfect 90-degree cuts. You're going to get your pieces maybe a little flared or whatever, and when you go to put them together, it's not going to look good. Okay. Next, I haven't done this yet. I already broke a rule, but for demonstration purposes, whenever you're handling a piece of trim or a piece of wood that's painted, this is a standard piece of baseboard. It's already been painted twice. You need to have some type of gloves on. I've got these rubber gloves here, or these, what are they, nylon? Yeah, something like that. You don't want to get all the fingerprints on the wood. People don't want to see your digit dinglers all over their wood. It's not something that anyone enjoys. You're going to have to go back and paint it again at the end. So when we do all of our handling of it, make sure to have these on. All right, here we are. This is where the action is going to happen. So we'll start out, whenever you're doing baseboards in a room, you want to come into the room and you want to figure out, okay, where am I going to start? It does matter a little bit where you start. And also, what your pieces are going to be, etc. So I come in here and I go, all right, this room, it's a little smaller, so it makes it easier. I go over and I check out what my dimensions are. In this case, I'm at 160 inches, 13 foot 4 inches. So to start with, that tells me my piece of trim, it's only 12 foot long. So I'm gonna need 2 pieces here. Because of that, I have to figure out what end I want what pieces. So whenever you come into a room, what you want is the piece of wood that's smaller to be in the spot where your eyes are going to go to the least. So if I'm walking in this room, in this scenario, there's a very nice pretty view over here, the window. I'm going to be looking straight ahead. So my eyes are going to be drawn to this area. And in that scenario, I would want a full piece over on this end. And then over here, my little leftover piece will be in the corner where people are less going to see it. All right, let's start out. Okay, so very first thing, we're going to start over in this corner. Make sure there's no nails, anything sticking out. In this case, it looks like we're good. On our baseboards, in this particular scenario, we're going to do what's called miter cuts. So it's going to be one piece up against another on a 45 and a 45, which equal 90 for everyone who's good at math. I'm over here on my right hand side doing a 45-degree cut. Now because my piece is longer, or I should say my wall is longer than 12, now on this end I'm going to have a slice that's going to be about right here. So I know that one's going to be 45 because they're both mitered together. Over here, whenever you do a butt, you do not want to butt your pieces of wood flat, 90 on 90. All right, there's a couple reasons why you don't want to do that. One, it's more noticeable. Nobody likes that. Two, in summer, winter, when the temperatures change, houses move. They're not just a fixed object. So what's going to happen, you may have wood expand, contract, etc. If they're butted, when they're expanding and contracting, they'll rip apart that caulk, and then you'll see a nice little crack right there. And also, they're more likely to stay together, especially if you nail them together. Okay. So in this case, all I need here, I'm not going to do a 45 because that'll leave more of a revealed angle. I'm going to do a 22.5, which is half of 45. All right, let's go cut a piece of wood. So, this one's a pretty easy cut. There's no measuring really involved. To start off with, your first question is going to be, how do I cut the piece of wood? Do I want to cut it like flat and put my saw on an angle 45? In this case, the saw can do it. Or do I want to stand it upright? You want to stand it upright. Now, the reason is, one, it's a lot easier. If you're having to do it on the side and cut your angle, it's harder to see, your saw's in the way. And it's not always as accurate because you can't quite tell what you're doing. So we're going to stand it up. I'm going to release my trigger here, swing over to 45. You can see there's a bunch of numbers. It tells you what angle is everything. So in this case, I'm going over to 45. There's a nice little groove that locks in. Make sure the saw's tight. We're good. So I'm going to want to use as much wood as I can, so I'm going to cut off on the end so there's as little of a piece as possible. You got to make sure though that you actually get a full cut, so don't go too far back. All right, now this is important. When you're cutting, you need to make sure your piece is firmly against, flat on your back guard and flat on the base of the saw. You don't want any jiggle. One, you can make the saw kick back. Two, you have to be sure you're going to get that 90-degree angle on the board. So over. Just gonna slide it down. All right. Okay. So something we didn't discuss upstairs. We're gonna do a 22.5, but what way do we do it? Do we do this 22.5, or do we do this 22? Is that it? Yeah, right there, or that 22.5. So what you want is when you're walking into the room, you want what's called your toe point to be away from what you're looking at. So what is a toe? Real quick, I'm just going to show you for demonstration. Whenever you do an angle cut, in carpentry they refer on a 45, whatever angle it is, doesn't matter. This would be your toe, just like if you were pointing your foot. And back here on the front edge would be called your heel, right? So in our situation now, we have to figure out, do we want our toe on the left or on the right? So when you're looking from the front entryway of a room, you want your toe to be the furthest point away from you, so it covers over the second piece of wood. In this case, we would want our 22.5 on this angle because our little leftover piece is going to be on the left side of the room. Does that make sense? I think so. All right. I did that wrong. Sounds good when I talk about it, but then I do it. What I'm trying to do here is, this is the toe. It should be back this way, because when you go to put it in, you'll see the butt through the crack. So what we want is it the other way. Even the best sometimes make a mistake. I guess you have proof now. All right. Take it on up. So while I'm here, something else we didn't talk about in the beginning is setting up your saw. We're outside. We're in kind of an ideal situation. We're under our carport. Now, if you may not always have this set up. This is kind of ideal, but a lot of times you might have your saw, and let's say you're in a customer's driveway. You don't want your saw too close to their cars or to anything that's just nice. It makes a lot of dust. In this case, Jeremy's car's here, but we don't care about that. This is okay. But if you're going to set up your saw, think about, all right, I don't want this dust flying on my customer's car. They come outside later and they're like, oh my gosh, and then you have to pay for their car wash. So think about this stuff. And the reason I bring this up is because we're also trying to get the saw at the same time to the closest entryway door that we can. Think about this. If you have a saw set up outside and you have to do, let's just say 100 cuts. If you have to do 100 cuts, that means you're gonna be going in and out 100 times. If you have to go in and out 100 times, just adding on 30 extra feet of walking is going to add on, it could add on like an hour to your day. Maybe, that might be a little exaggerated, but it's very possible. So we have ours here. The saw is probably 10 feet from the door, but I still have to walk through the house, all this stuff. So if you can get it as close to the front door, wherever you're going in as possible, do that. So anyway, we're gonna carry it through. When you're carrying my old boss, he had a dumb joke. He used to say, Justin, when you're carrying a piece of wood, there's two ends to it. This is the end that you're looking at, and then the end that you're not. I don't know why I thought it was funny. But anyway, the point is, this is actually important for anyone learning to do this stuff. You need to pay a lot of attention when you're walking through a house with a large piece of trim or something. You have a huge chance of scratching up any walls. So I try to keep my hands a little wider to manage both my ends. That way it doesn't fling and hit anything. You gotta weave into the house. check back on your back end about every time when you go through a door. Make sure you're not gonna snag on anything. And then also, it seems simple, but tip your piece of wood when you're walking through doorways. Don't hit your ceiling, don't hit the floor. See, look at that, I already hit it. I don't think I scratched it though. It's hard to do this on video. I'm gonna feed it through the doorway. I'm gonna walk around, and then I gotta do it again. Okay, I gotta walk down the hall. Oh, look at it. This is tough. I gotta make a big corner here, so I'm gonna push it through this doorway without trying to bump anything the best I can. This is a pretty long piece. And then go up the stairway. If you can get someone to help you, if you have to, go ahead and do it. Really try to minimize your bumps. Operation. Okay. You made it. Come over here real quick. So what I was talking about with this cut, you see how it's pointing away from the entry right behind you? I don't know if you can see that well. When this other piece comes in and butts in against it, you'll notice less of a cut on the piece of wood. It's a little thing, but it makes a difference. All right. Coming over here, we got this in place. Something you want to check. Here, I'm gonna go over here. You come on over here. We've got our cut in. Our edge ideally wants to land perfectly against the corner. Sometimes these corners aren't perfect. This one's pretty ugly. And if it goes in too far past this wall, when you go to butt your other piece in, they won't match up correctly on the front edge. So what I want to do is try and eyeball looking up this corner where the exact middle of it is, so that I can get a good joint. And this one's being a pain. Okay, that's not too bad right there. But I do have a lot of drywall on this other side. I can tell it's gonna hold up my other piece, and it's not gonna wanna go in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take out my box knife, and I'm gonna score away some of this drywall so I can get a good joint in my 45. You don't always have to do this. It'll make your life easier. Alright, let's move that out of the way for a second. Alright, not bad. Okay. So we're almost ready to nail. This is great, these cordless nail guns. Back in the day, we always just use an air compressor in a nail gun. You have a long cord, a big pain to move around. These things, I know it's a Craftsman, but look, it's 100 times better than having a corded gun, because you just pick it up, move around, you don't have to move around a big air compressor, your hose doesn't get tangled on things. Now with this, we're going to be using, this is a 16 gauge. This is a larger of the brad nailers. A lot of them are 18 gauge. I like the bigger brad nails because they help hold in your baseboards better in this scenario. A lot of times, if you use those smaller nails, they can pull through a little bit and it can cause cracking in your caulking, which, you know, over time they may want to move that thing we talked about earlier about expansion and contraction. And the next thing we got to talk about is the nail size. How do we know what size of 16 gauge brad nail are we going to use? Okay, this is a 2-inch 16 gauge brad nail. Why are we doing 2 inches? Okay, the general rule is when you're nailing an object into a piece of lumber, right? Because behind this drywall, these 2x4s, you want to have an equal size nail of what you are nailing through to what you are nailing into. So in this case, this piece of trim here is a 1/2 inch. I mean, it might be like 7/16. That's 1/2 inch. And my drywall is a 1/2 inch. So 1/2 inch is an inch. What's remaining is, out of the 2 inches, 1 inch. So you have 1 inch holding the board against it, and then 1 inch into the stud. All right, pretty simple. The other reason I like doing the 2 inch is because, so if there's any wires or pipes in the wall, usually it's going to be in the middle of the stud. The middle of the stud, you would have, you know, it is 3.5 inches. So if you split that in half, that's 1.5 inches, or excuse me, 1 3/4 inches. So if you're using this and it's only penetrating the lumber 1 inch, you still have 1/4 of an inch that is going to hopefully miss whatever wire you get close to or whatever pipe. I know that the wire is 1/2 inch too. You should just barely miss it. All right, 2 inch. That was a good explanation for something pretty simple. 1 3/4 inches is not going to be enough. You're not going to get a good bite into your wood. I mean, you can do longer nails, but you're running risk. And also, they don't always like to drive all the way in. So in this scenario, we have a 1/2 inch baseboard. So we're using 2 inch. Okay, I think you guys got the picture. All right, make sure my corner is on. All right, cool. All right, first time. So first I'm gonna nail in to the plate of the walls. The plate being at the bottom of my wall of 2x4s. I know I'm gonna hit wood. It runs along the bottom horizontally all around your house. Okay, we got one, it's in place. Next, ideally, you wanna hit 2x4s with every nail that you shoot. You don't want to shoot them into just drywall. It's not going to hold it super well. So, easy thing to figure out. You're always going to have 2x4s running vertically in your corners. So just to start with, you're going to want to angle one in whenever you start. All right, good. Went in deep too. Okay. So, we're going to do 2 nails, one on bottom, one on top, all the way down. And I'm going to try to hit studs every chance I get. So, good way to start. You know there's one on the corner. The framers run the wall correct. It should be at least 16 inches. So one clue is you can look up at the room to try and figure out where they are. In this scenario, we have a window. I know there is going to be one directly under this as the kink stud and one to the left of it as a jack under the window. My 16 is here. It's not far off, so I'm going to shoot one pretty much on the edge of that window above me. Okay, I can hear it. Let's do. So from there, I'm going to continue on. Hopefully that pattern runs. Sounds good. Now I'm going to go to 32. Always angle down to try and hit that plate because you at the very least can always get into wood that way. And then right here on the 32. something you need to pay attention to as you're nailing. If you look underneath the piece of trim, I'm starting to get a gap as I go left. Now this lumber is more or less straight, this baseboard. Sometimes floors just sag. This is an older house, it's from the 70s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat it a little. And as I work my way down the wall, I'm going to push down on my baseboard so that it sits as flush as possible with the floor. Look at that. Okay, I know there's one here through the window, so I'm going to jump past my 16 a little bit. Ooh, I hit something, it didn't go all the way in. Come back to that in a second. Now here's another clue. Right here we see there's a little, this doesn't look great, but it's like a little seam from the drywall tape. Now whenever you see the seam of the drywall tape, you know that's where the drywall is landing on a stud. So I'm going to go to this. Starting to get it and popping out a bit. I'm going to sink a little deeper. Alright. Okay, so now I'm down at the end here. What I like to do when I get to the end and I'm going to be getting another piece on, I don't nail this all the way down yet. I leave a little play until I get my other piece. That way I can fit it in. If I have to move that out of the way a little bit, slap them together. It makes it a little easier. But before we do that, Jeremy, I think I stole your hole punch here. I'm going to use it real quick. Okay. So generally, I like to do, we've got these nails popping out right here. When we go to have to do our touch-up after, we can't leave them out like that. We got to push them in. So we're going to use, it's called a hole punch. Now normally I like to do all my hole punching all at the same time. That way I don't get, distracted from what I'm doing, but for the video, we'll do it right now. Okay, so something to think about. I have two hammers here. Jeremy's probably wondering why I have two hammers. So one's bigger, one's smaller. This is a framing hammer, this is a claw hammer. I'm gonna avoid using my framing hammer. And the reason I'm gonna do that, if you look at these two hammer heads, one has serrades and one is rounded. If I use this thing, and let's say, heaven forbid, I make a mistake, I hit the wood, it's gonna leave a nice little waffle pattern. So I'm gonna, in this case, I'm gonna avoid that. And I'm gonna opt for a smoother hammer head, just in case I bump. This is a little tricky. We got the two out here. You're gonna get your pin on your nail, and you wanna try to find the same angle that you shot it in at. And I like to hold mine close to the tip. These angles get awkward. More. Is that two more? Just one. That one's a pretty sharp angle. It looks like it hit something. Alright, we got it. Okay, so let's just say for now, that's a pretty good basic overview. There's a lot more little things that can be done, and maybe we'll do some more videos here in a bit, but that's the basics. Alright, sounds good.